Hey everyone, welcome to the Smiling Homeschooler podcast. We're glad you can join us. Before we begin here, we just want to say thank you to Teaching Textbooks for making the Smiling Homeschooler possible. As always, they're an amazing partner, an amazing company. And if you need to smile more during math time, then you probably need to check out Teaching Textbooks. So go do that over at teachingtextbooks.com. They have a free trial. They're just an amazing curriculum. We also want to say thank you to Samaritan Ministries. They are a community of Christians that pay one another's medical bills, helping families take a safe step of faith as they feel God's leading in career or ministry changes or in bringing moms home. And you can learn more over at samaritanministries.org/familyman, and we appreciate their support as well. All right, Dad, if you're ready, go ahead and get started. Let's go.
Well, hey, it was a gray, rainy day here in northern Indiana. Felt exactly like school should feel like. It was just kind of blah. And today they were asking, everybody was over at our house just a little while ago, and they were all talking to Jed about school. And Jed said something like, how was school today? And he goes, I wasn't really feeling it today, which meant he probably didn't get a lot accomplished. But it felt like one of those days that you wouldn't want to accomplish a lot.
Yeah.
So
I will say though, this era, season, it does have that kind of golden glow. I don't know if you were looking outside at all this morning before it started to rain and later in the day, but there was just a really beautiful, it was sunny, but it still has just a different look. It's kind of that I guess it really is just a golden look versus the summer. It's just a very bright, and I would love fall, honestly, if winter wasn't after it. Like if it was just fall straight into spring. I really do love fall, like the atmosphere, and I like I like the country magazine vision of fall, with the pumpkins and all that. But it's just the aftermath,
Well, it's kind of a window. There's this weather window between fall and winter and summer and fall. And it really doesn't matter where you live. I assume if you live in Alaska, it's not as cold as it's going to be. Or if it's in Arizona, it's not as hot as it was. So, these are kind of like the month to really enjoy family, because that's what I always think of. I can remember even when I was in kindergarten in a public school watching these old movies, and they'd always show these families kind of playing in these crunchy leaves. And it does kind of feel like that. There are a lot of memories to be had, and homeschooling takes advantage of those things with pumpkin patches and hay rides and apples. And this past weekend, we were at the Johnny Appleseed Festival in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which has to be one of the largest, I would guess, fall festivals in Indiana, at least. It is humongous, a couple 100,000 people, and it is the actual burial place for John Chapman, also known as Johnny Appleseed, which is kind of cool to go up and pay your respects at this old grave that is littered with apples. So that's kind of fun. It's fun to see all the artisans and the crafts and smell the wood burning fires, and it's just a good time. And so if you have one of those places around you, make sure you take advantage of it. I know that if you're at all like me, that you're like, didn't we just do this like 4 weeks ago? And it's been like 2 years. But it's still worth going to again and again, because there's a lot of memories to be had.
It is. It's a good time, and the kids always love it, so even if it's not your thing, it's not always, as we know as parents, about just our thing, and it is really enjoyable. I did like it. I got my caramel corn, and that was good. So it's a fun time. But I think those fall thing, or just in general, those things like that, they really build up the feelings of childhood. So I mean, now whenever I smell a wood fire during the fall, I think of the Johnny Appleseed Festival because of that. So.
Well, I think it's because, and this is not what we're going to talk about, but I think it's because all your senses are like kicking in. It's got the sound, it's got a crunchy sound of the leaves, it's the smells, it's the feels, it's the taste of apple cider and s'mores and
$20 gallon of apple cider. We didn't buy any, but man, that's crazy.
You sound like a true father. And it's just, I think those just embed those into our minds so deeply. I was just talking to my mom just a few minutes ago, and we were talking about Halloween and how when I was a kid, the Martins, Robbie and Johnny's parents, they lived right down the street from us, two houses over, and every Halloween they would open their when the whole neighborhood was trick or treating, they would open up their garage and have white powdered donuts and apple cider and coffee, and it was just so. It just, again burned into both our memories, and those are the things that you want to take advantage of. But that's not what we're going to talk about. So today we're talking about maybe for the next couple of weeks, several weeks, maybe looking at the different subjects in our homeschools and just kind of talking about them. And I asked Ben if maybe we could talk about literature today, because even the sound literature sounds like a big scary thing. And I think, it has become a big scary thing, and it shouldn't be. And so I thought we'd talk about that. We'll talk about some of those important things, maybe not some important things. And here's my goal. My goal is to not equip, but to empower you to do what you think is best in literature. And when we talk about math, about math. When we talk about history. Because I feel like, and I was just talking to my mom again, I feel like we have been not duped. We've been taught to follow what the status quo is. We just keep doing the same thing, even though, as we're going to talk a little bit later, I tell you right now, with all honesty, I could not point out what an indirect object is in any sentence, or the direct object. And some of these things that were so important for us to make sure we learned and took tests on, we never, ever use it again in our entire lives. And we keep doing it. So let's just talk about literature. And when I say the word literature, what do you kind of think of?
Well, that's what I was going to say is what we should make a definition. I don't know what, I don't know. I think I was kind of thinking about it / looking into a little bit if there was an official definition of what their purpose of literature is, because obviously it can mean, I think, different things, and it's become different things. I think to a lot of people it is just that. It's reading poetry, reading a bunch of old books like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Great Gatsby, and then you have to, fill out a report or whatever else it is. But I mean, the distillation of what its goal is, I found one that I actually liked, which was basically the idea is learning to think about books and other things like that, to understand what their meaning and their thoughts and their beliefs or whatever else it is, so that you can better understand and have better perspective and exploring other ideas, cultures, etc. And I'm like, that idea I can kind of get behind. I feel like that has helped me a lot. We were talking about this last week on history, is I feel like my reading of history and reading books related and whatever has given me kind of a way to look at the world now through the lens of what's happened in the past to some extent. And I feel like that's really valuable. But I feel like what it becomes is, and I was talking to this for my friends, we went to something on this weekend, and, it was just, we were talking about how they all hated history except for one who, the guy didn't care if they did their tests open book or not. He just wanted it was all essay form. So they actually had to they could just read it and talk about it and how it connected, but he didn't care about dates and stuff like that. I was like, wow, that guy actually got it. But anyways, so with literature, it's people I just don't think kids care about The Great Gatsby so much and then having to write a report on it. But if they can understand that it is more of the real true goal, which has been lost, I feel like that is not a terrible idea. But what do you think?
So here's what listen, I'm not going to talk about what I think literature is yet. Let me just tell you what it has become, like you were kind of hinting at. Google just says literature refers to written works, especially those considered to have artistic or intellectual merit that explore themes and ideas related to the human experience, and is broadly categorized into genres like fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and drama. It encompasses traditional written works, but also includes digital formats and, in a more specialized context, all the documented information pertinent to a particular subject. And it goes on. In fact, I even looked up, how should one go about teaching literature? And it says to teach literature effectively, build a strong foundation with literary terms and concepts using engaging activities like small group discussions and creative projects. Connect text to the media like film and foster a personal response through meaningful conversation using open-ended questions to encourage deep thinking and an analysis of themes, characters, and literary devices within different genres and authors. And so they would say, number one, build foundational skills, introduce literary terms, start with key terms like metaphor, point of view, and plot structure, providing definition and examples to build a vocabulary for, and then it goes on and on and on and on, paragraph after paragraph. And then you can even hit more where you can go deeper. And honestly, it just nauseates me even just reading it. Only because it seems funny to me how it, and even when you were describing it, Ben, it's funny to me how and I wish I could say your words over again because I think they were said real well, that we feel like we have to back up the reason why we're going to read, because that's what I would just call read. I would say literature is reading.
Yeah, it's not necessarily learning to read, which I know people break off as a separate subject, but it is reading and books. I mean, because I mean, there's so many ideas in books, and there's so many different worlds and things like that. So I get.
But to me, it's almost like saying, if a fast food restaurant had developed literature, they would not explain it this way. They wouldn't say, hey, it's like going to McDonald's and saying, the food is nutritious to your body, and it, by eating it, it turns it into energy, which they don't say any of that. Right. They just say, hey, come for a good meal.
Right.
And of
or
course,
if you're
McDonald's does
watch a movie,
deliver.
It changes it to study the creation of cinema, and you're like, I don't want to study cinema. I want to watch a movie, and it's like,
right.
But they are, and I get you can critically think about stuff. I'm not saying there is not extra thinking involved, but just the love of reading a book and understanding that and being able to comprehend what a book's about. That's a lot of it is about, is focused around. And I get there's different forms and all whatnot, but some of those extra stuff that
but
they
there's
try
something
to flesh
about
it out with is just like, I don't know.
To me, I say this about we Christians in America in the church today, we have this love of worshiping God. Not love of God always, but we love to worship. We love the worshiping part. We like to have the best music. We have to like the whatever. And sometimes I think literature, it's not a love of, it's not trying to learn more. It's like a love of the knowledge itself. So we like to make up stuff. And so someone made up and say, hey, we're not going to call the good guy in this story. We're going to call him a protagonist. And then we'll have a test where you say, can you identify the protagonist? And any kid can read the Three Little Pigs and know right away who the bad guy is. They know it's the big bad wolf.
But, that'd be the
antagonist. That's the antagonist. But then we give it a label, and we say, okay, who is the antagonist? And then we feel so good about that. And again, no one ever talks about it again unless you're an English teacher.
Right.
And so I think, we do that. And you already mentioned, Ben, that how there's kind of an emphasis on classics. There's this thing with literature that we seem to elevate certain books, stories, maybe even poems. And my dad, always said classics were books that people have never read, and really it kind of is that way oftentimes, what are your thoughts, Ben, on knowing the classics? And what's the value of knowing that, that you read a book that might be a classic? And Ben's a
Honestly,
reader,
I
so
feel
Ben loves
like
this stuff.
I'm not saying they're not good books, but I think that a lot of people, what's
Just say
better than
garbage.
reading a classic is having other people know you've read a classic, you know? Like,
Yeah,
I
right.
think people love, and I work with someone who does this, where they love being like, oh, I'm reading, Homer's, whatever, like Iliad. And it's just like, I mean, I'm not saying there's a reason they are famous, like Shakespeare is famous for a reason. I'm not saying it's not, but especially for kids, I think you can kill their interest completely if you only focus on books that are not engaging for them. And maybe the Odyssey will be, or maybe Great Gatsby is so engaging and whatever. But a lot of them have just become classics that continue to keep going because people want them to keep going more than they're just super engaging to every kid. Again, and they are great books. I've read a lot of books that are classics, like Treasure Island. I love Treasure Island. I would say it's a classic. It's been around a long time. Or Robinson Crusoe. So there's great classics out there.
Yeah, but I've tried some of those.
Some of them are not.
Yeah. I remember I tried to read to you guys 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and it was hard to get through. And some of those other things are super hard. I think what you said is spot on. I think sometimes there is that love of knowledge. It really is pride, where we can say to someone, yes, I've read this.
And I felt that. Like, I feel that sometimes where I'm like, ooh, I want to read this book, because if I've read this book, and then I can say that I've read that book, that's cool to be able to say that. How many times does that come up in conversation? Not very frequently.
I mean, really, when you read The Fall of the Roman Empire, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I started it, but yeah.
Oh, well, you were young.
Yeah.
You were like 12, and wanted to read it. I mean, again,
because you're like, wow, man, if he can read that at that age, look how smart he is, And like, there's nothing inherently more beneficial necessarily of Great Gatsby over some other great book that you found with your kids and have enjoyed, and that is 100% valid. Those are both literature, and it's okay to not hit all the classics. I mean, literally the only time I ever talked to anyone about I'm trying to think of another one. I should look that up. I should look up, like, what are all the most common
Moby
ones.
Dick,
yeah. Well, I actually did like Moby Dick
Melville.
Or an abridged version. But it is when I'm talking to people about the like Of Mice and Men or Lord of the Flies or things like that. It's like the only time I've ever talked about any of those books are when people are talking about school and having to do required reading. And a lot of them will either now use ChatGPT, or they'd use the Cliff Notes back in the day and just summarize it and read it and get the points, because again, they didn't care. And I feel like so many people, which is sad, lost the joy of reading during the class that tries to instill the joy of reading, because they're picking books that are not enjoyable for a lot of people, or they're forcing it, versus you get the opportunity as homeschoolers to embrace just the actual joy part and the reading fun part. Like Anne of Green Gables, that's a classic, but I think that one holds up really well, and again, whatever you like. If you like to read, 1984, which might be really relevant now, but, or things like that, totally great. I think those are good books and have good stuff there. But
I think it's too, but I think sometimes parents kid themselves into believing that, they are good books, because some of those books are so hard to get through. Even, George Orwell's 1984 or whatever, some of those books, the language is deep, the thoughts are deep. And it's hard if you're a non-literature kid who loves these. And again, I've talked to homeschooling moms, whose eyes light up when they are talking about The Great Gatsby. They light up when they talk about.
Which, if you love the book, that's fine to love a book. I mean, that's not bad.
But I think you're kidding yourself if you think all your kids are going to love it as well. And I think, I'll tell you, I was raised in a public school. I went to all the way through. In just a second, I'm going to ask Ben about some of his favorite books. I don't have any favorite books because I didn't read any favorite books. All I read were those classics that I can't remember what they are because they weren't memorable to me, and I miss that, so I don't have any favorite books and Ben and Sam and all my kids, they all have stories that they would say, oh, I love that story. I love that story. And they just could go through dozens of books because they loved reading.
Well, and the reality is, I mean, just like movies or music or tastes or anything else, like everyone's tastes do vary. So it is really hard to find anything, even something that's considered a classic, that every person enjoys, So, and that's sometimes tough, to realize, but, and I think it's just a bummer. But the cool thing about homeschooling is obviously we can get to pick. So, I don't know. I have books that I liked, I know that those may not be as popular now, but I mean, like the Red Wall books, I love those are fiction, but there's like the We Were There books. I've talked about those before. I loved the mystery books of like Boxcar Children when I was little, all those kind of things. But before we get more into it, though, I do want to talk about kind of how I would approach finding books now, and we do it with my wife and our kids. But before we do that, I want to say thank you to Teaching Textbooks and for making the Smiling Homeschooler possible. If your math curriculum isn't making you guys smile or your kids smile, then check them out over at teachingtextbooks.com. They have a free trial. It's super engaging. It's interactive. They have to learn as they're going, and it's just a great curriculum. So check them out. Appreciate their support.
We also want to thank Samaritan Ministries and their latest all-digital offering called Redeem Health Share Ministry for being part of today's show. Redeem upholds the same great mission as Samaritan of Christians helping other Christians share their healthcare needs. But Redeem offers even more flexible programs like a group option for churches, businesses, and ministries. And there's also an exclusive add-on feature that makes services like dental, vision, preventative, and alternative treatments eligible for sharing. Not long ago, I had two dads who contacted me who said they just joined Redeem, which is exciting to hear. And like these two dads, if you're looking at a job change, feel like you pay too much in health insurance, or you're just tired of the healthcare program you're a part of, can I encourage you to check out redeemhealthshare.org.
But yeah, so books, I mean, again, it's so hard because it is so purely based on taste of what your kid's into, what their interests are. But there are good stories that I think are just across the board good. Like I loved By the Great Horn Spoon. We've talked about that one before. Or I think it was called The Great Wheel, which is about the making of the Ferris wheel back, and it's kind of from a kid's standpoint. Or like I just mentioned, Treasure Island and Swiss Family Robinson. Those were two of my favorite ones. But what we've done now with the kids, and I think is such a fun thing now, especially in an era of digital, is just going to the library, or maybe you can go to a half price books or a thrift store and just looking through the books, because there's just so much out there that, if your kid's interested in it, that is such an awesome opportunity. That is literature. It may not be where they break Romeo and Juliet down or Macbeth and, outline all the stuff and do a full report. But if they're enjoying reading a book and it's on whatever topic that is, has characters, has any kind of theme, because almost pretty much any book does, unless it's just purely like animals or whatever, like it is going to have characters. They're going to pick that stuff up. You don't have to worry about that. I didn't have to fill out tests. I didn't have to do all that. And I know who the main character is of a book. I understand what the main, focus is and the growth over time and the progression of their story and all that kind of stuff.
Which is that's a no-brainer. Right. I mean, of course, their growth over time, but I think when we break down a book in literature, we ruin the book. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just feel like we do. I just remember, and I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. I remember when we all went to the Billy Graham Museum, and it's an amazing museum in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I remember the ladies, when you walk in the front desk, they gave some of our kids, Ben wasn't there at the time because he was all growed up, and they handed us these little a little card that they could find things in the museum, and if they got all the answers right, they got a prize at the end. I don't know what the prize. I can't remember what the prize was, but I know our kids didn't even hardly see the museum because they were so focused on getting the right answers. And I think we do the same thing when we ask questions and we I think what we want our kids to do is we want them to read those books on a level that they can read and glean from whatever that they find that they want to glean. So if it's just an adventure book that they love, that's maybe they don't get any, maybe they just like the process and they go on to read something else. I think too that it's important, and I want to talk about some more books that you might recommend, Ben, but I think it's important for kids to read, like to read books that they can engage with on whatever level they are at. I think some of these, even that Ben has already, Across Five Aprils is a great book to read out loud because it was so much fun, or The Great Wheel to read out loud. But we didn't have our kids read it on their own because they would have gotten bogged down in the language of it.
Initially,
Yeah, and so as a fourth grader, it's probably too much. Maybe as an older kid, or maybe after they've heard it read out loud, they go back and read it again.
Yep, totally. And I mean, because that's the goal. And the goal is, I do think the principle of, again, wanting to give your kids, because I do think books can give you someone so much, like the ability to be a little bit self-aware, if that makes sense. Like that's the thing that's helped me most in life from all the reading is, when we're talking to my boss or a coworker or whatever else it is, it's like I can kind of hold the idea or the topic or the whatever the conversation is and kind of be like, be able to look at it, if that makes sense. It's kind of I don't know. I'm not wording it probably super well, but I do think like reading allows you to kind of have a perspective on that to some extent. And I really love that. But yeah, I don't think that breaking stuff down does give you that much over anything else. And it just doesn't get used anywhere else unless you're a critic. It just doesn't really come up in day-to-day stuff. But, like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and those books, I mean, I think those are all-time classics. The other thing is it just doesn't have to necessarily be 100% reading. I mean, you could do audiobooks. You could, I think there's legitimacy to even some movies if you wanted to some extent. I don't think necessarily all the time, but like we were going to do, my kids, we were talking about World War II the other day because, they didn't know a lot about it. So we were looking through, I have like some, photographic encyclopedia of World War II. And we were just flipping through pictures of that. But I was like, if I could find a video that, a good documentary that just kind of showed some of the broad strokes, I think that'd be kind of interesting. Obviously, I'd have to be a little bit careful, but of what they show, because some of it's pretty traumatic.
Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Charlotte's Web. Those are, some of those books are so great. But again, a lot of them are read alouds. Lord of the Rings. That was something I remember very vividly. Dad reading out loud with us and was a huge, formative thing. And then we did so many books, with Mom, but reading myself, it was just going to the library through the kids section. For me, again, I'm the history guy. So it was looking through, it was the, the landmark history books, I think they called them or something like that. So there'd be like the story of, or childhood of a famous Americans. These are old books, but old books are still as relevant today as they were back then, probably more so, because a lot of people have gone back and tried to change stuff. But, it'd be like the story of George Washington or as a kid, or it'd be the story of Thomas Edison as a child, and Mark Twain and all those kind of things. And I loved those. And I was probably, 10, 12 reading those. And I mean, that really, it was what I loved. But Sam would get art books and read stuff on art, or just we'd flip through the encyclopedia back then, which I kind of miss, honestly. I was thinking about that with the kids as we were older. This was not when we were like 6, or anything like that, but we were probably 12, 13, 14. We'd have the World Book encyclopedias that my grandpa would get from the library when they would sell their old sets for like $1 because, no one wants a 1978 version of the encyclopedia. But
now you might get 3 sets for $1.
Yeah, exactly. Now they don't even make them anymore, so you can't buy them anywhere. But we would read through those and just read random stuff on all sorts of stuff, So it's like, it's not building, we're not, analyzing the plot, but it's just, you're just having an interest in learning about stuff. And I think that is really the goal overall, is understanding that. And it's, it's like, maybe I didn't read a lot of poems until I had to do a literature class in college, but when I got there and I had to pass one, it was no big deal. And I had read so much, it was super easy. And it's like, okay. And I've never had to use any of that stuff again. And I don't read poetry now, so it doesn't really help me that much to understand the structure and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's okay, personally. So
Chat GPT can write an incredible poem, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
On anything.
Let's take out all the creativity.
Exactly. So, hey, we need to wrap this up because we're just about out of time. But again, I just want to say, if I had to boil it down, literature is getting your kid is just reading, and for some of your kids who like bugs, maybe it's, starting out just picture bug books, or maybe it becomes a story later on like Charlotte's Web. Um, you know, uh, I, honestly, as a parent, I didn't care. I just wanted my kids to read, and I want them to read the Bible, and I want them to see the value of that. So I know there was one mom I was talking to years ago, and she was a great homeschooler, and she covered a lot of material with her kids. She did lots of literature programs. But when my wife, Debbie, would talk about all the books that they had read with our kids, she said, you know what? She goes, I haven't read anything with my kids because we just don't have time. And to me, that's sad, because they missed out on the best that homeschooling has to offer. The literature has to offer. You got to do it together as a family. And so, again, I just want to embolden you to do what you know is best. You don't have to do what they say. In fact, you probably shouldn't, because it's time for someone to say, hey, that's not a very good book, and read something better. So have a great week and enjoy some of that fall weather. Maybe get a good old fall book to read, and I'm sure it's going to make you smile.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to Teaching Textbooks for making the Smiling Homeschooler possible. And also thank you to Samaritan Ministries. They are a community of Christians that pay one another's medical bills, helping families take a safe step of faith as they feel God's leading in career or ministry changes or in bringing mom home. And you can learn more over at samaritanministries.org/familyman. But all right, everyone, have a great week. Don't forget to smile, and we'll see you next week.